Marcus Chun adjusted his silk tie for the third time as his black Mercedes pulled up to the modest diner on the outskirts of downtown Chicago. The billionaire tech mogul had built his empire on precision, but today felt different. Today, everything had to be perfect. The merger with Quantum Industries would make him the largest technology conglomerate owner in North America, and this informal meeting was the final step before tomorrow's board presentation. The diner looked nothing like the high-end restaurants where Marcus usually conducted business. Paint peeled from the yellow walls, and the neon sign flickered with the words, Mel's Family Diner. But James Hartwell, CEO of Quantum Industries, had insisted on meeting here. The older man claimed it reminded him of his childhood, and Marcus had learned that successful deals sometimes required accommodating eccentric preferences. Inside, the smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, and a long counter stretched across one side of the restaurant. Marcus spotted James immediately. The silver-haired man sat in a corner booth, already nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing documents spread across the table. Marcus, James stood and extended his hand. Glad you could make it to my favorite spot. Wouldn't miss it, Marcus replied, sliding into the booth opposite James. The leather briefcase beside him contained the final contracts, merger documents, and, most importantly, the revolutionary formula that would change everything. The mathematical equation represented 3 years of research and development, a breakthrough in quantum computing that would revolutionize data processing speeds. A young black woman approached their table, notepad in hand. Her name tag read Keisha, and despite the modest uniform of black pants and a white shirt, she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her smile seemed genuine as she greeted them. Good afternoon, gentlemen. What can I get you started with today? James looked up from his papers. I'll have the usual, Keisha. Coffee, black, and the turkey club. Coming right up, Mr. Hartwell. She turned to Marcus. And for you, sir? Marcus barely glanced up from the documents James had slid across to him. Just coffee. Black. As Keisha walked away, James leaned forward conspiratorially. She's been working here for about 6 months. Sweet girl, putting herself through college. Reminds me of my daughter at that age. Marcus nodded absently, his attention focused on the contract amendments. The numbers looked correct, and the timeline satisfied both companies' board requirements. Everything appeared perfect for tomorrow's presentation to the shareholders. Now, about the quantum processing formula, James said, lowering his voice. I've had my team review it extensively. Brilliant work, Marcus. Absolutely brilliant. Marcus felt pride swell in his chest. The formula represented his company's crown jewel, developed by a team of the world's brightest minds. When implemented, it would increase data processing speeds by over 300%, making current technology obsolete overnight. The merger would combine his innovation with Quantum Industries' manufacturing capabilities, creating an unstoppable force in the tech industry. I appreciate that, James. My team worked around the clock for 3 years to perfect it. James pulled out a tablet and opened a presentation. I've prepared some projections based on the implementation timeline. If we can get this to market within 18 months, we're looking at revolutionary change across every industry that relies on data processing. As they discussed market projections and implementation strategies, Keisha returned with their order. She set down James's sandwich and refilled both coffee cups with practiced efficiency. Will there be anything else right now? She asked politely. We're fine, thank you, James replied. Marcus was deeply engrossed in the tablet presentation, making notes in the margins of his copy of the contract. Keisha began to walk away, then hesitated. She glanced back at their table, her expression troubled. The two men were completely absorbed in their discussion, papers and tablets scattered between them. She could see complex mathematical equations and formulas displayed on the tablet screen from where she stood. Something nagged at her. During her breaks, she often studied for her advanced mathematics classes at Chicago Community College. She was working toward a degree in applied mathematics, hoping eventually to transfer to a 4-year university. The formula visible on the tablet looked familiar, similar to equations she had been studying in her quantum mechanics course. But something looked wrong. Keisha knew she should mind her own business. These were obviously important businessmen discussing matters far above her pay grade. She was just a waitress trying to make ends meet while pursuing her education. Who was she to question their work? Yet the discrepancy bothered her. In her quantum mechanics class, Professor Williams had drilled into his students the importance of precision in mathematical formulations. One wrong variable, he often said, can invalidate an entire theory. The equation on the tablet had what appeared to be a sign error in the third coefficient. If she was right, it would completely alter the formula's outcome. But surely these successful businessmen knew what they were doing. They had teams of experts, resources she could never imagine. Keisha forced herself to walk away, returning to her other tables and pushing the nagging feeling aside. She served coffee to the elderly couple in booth 3, took an order from the construction workers at the counter, and cleaned tables as the lunch rush began to wind down. But her eyes kept drifting back to the corner booth where the two men continued their animated discussion. The tablet remained open, the formula still visible. Each time she looked, the same error seemed to jump out at her. Finally, during a brief lull in customers, Keisha approached their table again with the coffee pot. "Refill?" she offered, her heart beating faster than normal. "Please," James said, holding out his cup. As Keisha poured, she caught another glimpse of the formula on the screen. Her suspicions were confirmed. The error was definitely there, and if her understanding was correct, it would cause significant problems in any practical application. She finished pouring Marcus's coffee, her hands slightly trembling. The smart thing would be to stay quiet, finish her shift, and continue with her own studies. These men were clearly successful and powerful. What business did a community college student working as a waitress have in questioning their work? But Professor Williams's voice echoed in her mind. Mathematics doesn't care about your social status, your wealth, or your title. Truth is truth, and an error is an error. Marcus was explaining implementation costs to James, completely unaware of Keisha's internal struggle. The merger documents lay spread across the table, representing millions of dollars and thousands of jobs. Tomorrow's board meeting would seal the deal, launching a new era in quantum computing. The manufacturing timeline looks aggressive but achievable, Marcus was saying. With your facilities and our technology, we should be able to scale production rapidly. James nodded enthusiastically. The market is ready for this breakthrough. We'll revolutionize everything from artificial intelligence to medical research. Keisha lingered beside their table, coffee pot in hand, wrestling with her conscience. She thought about her own struggles, working double shifts to pay for college while maintaining her grades. She thought about her younger brother, who looked up to her as an example that education could change their family's circumstances. She also thought about integrity, about the responsibility that comes with knowledge, regardless of where that knowledge is acquired. Taking a deep breath, Keisha made her decision. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Both men looked up at her, surprised by the interruption. "I'm sorry to bother you," Keisha continued, her heart pounding. "I couldn't help but notice the formula on your screen." Marcus's expression shifted from surprise to mild annoyance. "Yes." Keisha's mouth felt dry, but she pressed on. "I think there might be an error in the third coefficient. The positive sign should be negative." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. James blinked slowly, processing what the young waitress had just said. Marcus stared at her with complete incredulity. "I beg your pardon," Marcus finally said, his voice cold. Keisha's hands trembled slightly, but she held her ground. In quantum field theory, when dealing with eigenvalue equations of that type, the third coefficient typically carries a negative sign to account for the phase relationship. The way it's written now would create instability in the system. James leaned back in his seat, studying Keisha with new interest. Marcus's face had turned red, whether from embarrassment or anger, it was difficult to tell. "Young lady," Marcus said slowly, "this formula represents 3 years of research by some of the brightest minds in quantum physics. I don't think a waitress is qualified to—" "Marcus," James interrupted quietly, his eyes still fixed on Keisha. "What's your background in mathematics?" Keisha straightened slightly, finding strength in the genuine curiosity in James's voice. "I'm studying applied mathematics at Chicago Community College. I'm taking advanced quantum mechanics this semester. I know I'm probably wrong, but The equation just looked familiar, and something seemed off. Marcus started to speak again, but James held up his hand. He turned the tablet toward himself and studied the formula more carefully. "What did you say about the phase relationship?" James asked. Keisha pointed to the screen, her confidence growing slightly. "See how the third term is supposed to represent the interaction between quantum states? With a positive coefficient, it would create constructive interference where you need destructive interference. It would make the system unstable." James's eyes widened as he examined the equation more closely. He pulled out his phone and opened a calculator app, running some quick calculations. Marcus watched this exchange with growing discomfort. "James, surely you're not seriously considering. The waitress is right," James said quietly, looking up from his phone. His face had gone pale. "What?" Marcus leaned forward, grabbing the tablet. "She's absolutely right. Look at the calculation." James showed him the phone screen. With the positive coefficient, the system becomes unstable after about 47 iterations. It would crash any quantum processor trying to run it. Marcus stared at the calculations, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. His team had checked and rechecked the formula hundreds of times. The merger depended on this breakthrough. Tomorrow's presentation, the board meeting, the $100 million deal. Everything hinged on this mathematical equation. "There has to be some mistake," Marcus muttered, pulling out his own phone to verify the calculations. Keisha stood quietly beside the table, watching the two powerful men grapple with the implications of her observation. She felt a mixture of vindication and anxiety. Had she just prevented a disaster, or had she destroyed something important? As Marcus confirmed the error on his phone, the color drained from his face. "How is this possible? My entire team verified this formula." James looked at Keisha with something approaching awe. "What's your name?" "Keisha Thompson, sir." "Keisha Thompson," James repeated slowly. "You may have just saved both our companies from the biggest mistake of our careers." The weight of the moment settled over the three of them. In the background, the normal sounds of the diner continued: coffee brewing, conversations at other tables, the occasional laugh from the kitchen. But at their corner booth, everything had changed. Marcus was frantically scrolling through his phone, calling his head of research and development. Keisha could hear him explaining the error, his voice tight with stress and barely controlled panic. James, meanwhile, continued to study the young woman who had just upended their entire business plan. "Tell me, Keisha," he said thoughtfully, "what are your plans after community college?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm hoping to transfer to a 4-year university, sir. Maybe study theoretical mathematics or physics." "Financial constraints?" James asked gently. Keisha nodded, suddenly self-conscious again about her uniform and her situation. "Yes, sir. That's why I'm working here, to save money for tuition." Marcus finished his phone call and rejoined the conversation, his expression a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "My team confirms it," he said heavily. "The error would have caused catastrophic failures in any practical application. We could have lost everything. The merger, both companies, thousands of jobs." He looked at Keisha with new respect. "I owe you an apology. And, more than that, I owe you a debt of gratitude." Keisha felt overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Just minutes ago, she had been debating whether to speak up at all. Now, these two billionaires were looking at her as if she had performed a miracle. "I was just trying to help," she said quietly. "Help?" James laughed, but it was a sound of amazement rather than humor. "Young lady, you just prevented one of the most expensive mistakes in corporate history." The implications were still sinking in. Marcus thought about tomorrow's board meeting, where he would have proudly presented the flawed formula to investors and shareholders. The merger would have proceeded, manufacturing would have begun, and, eventually, when the quantum processors started failing, the scandal would have destroyed both companies. "The question now," Marcus said, looking between James and Keisha, "is what we do next." Keisha glanced around the diner, suddenly, aware that other customers were beginning to notice the intensity of the conversation at their table. Her manager would expect her to return to her duties soon. "I should probably get back to work," she said uncertainly. "No," James said firmly. "I don't think you understand the magnitude of what just happened here." Marcus nodded in agreement. "James is right. You've changed everything." As if to underscore the point, Marcus's phone rang again. He glanced at the screen and sighed. It's my head of engineering. I need to start damage control immediately. He answered the call, stepping away from the table for privacy. James turned his full attention to Keisha. Sit down for a moment, if you would. Keisha glanced toward the kitchen, where her manager was visible through the serving window. I really should. Please, James said gently. Just for a few minutes. Reluctantly, Keisha slid into the booth beside James, feeling strange to be sitting with a customer, especially one conducting such important business. Tell me about your studies, James said. What specifically interests you about quantum mechanics? Keisha found herself relaxing slightly as she talked about her passion for mathematics and physics. She explained her fascination with quantum theory, her dreams of contributing to scientific research, and her frustration with the financial barriers that seemed to stand between her and her goals. James listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about her coursework and her professors. It became clear that despite his business success, he had a genuine appreciation for academic achievement and scientific inquiry. Marcus returned to the table, his expression grim but determined. We're going to have to postpone tomorrow's board meeting, he announced. My team needs time to correct the formula and run new simulations. How long will that take? James asked. At least a month, maybe 2. We'll have to start the verification process from scratch. James nodded thoughtfully. That gives us time to explore some other possibilities. Both men looked at Keisha, who was beginning to feel uncomfortable under their scrutiny. What kind of possibilities? Marcus asked. Well, James said slowly, we've just witnessed something remarkable. A community college student, working part-time as a waitress, identified a critical error that our teams of experts missed. That suggests we might benefit from a fresh perspective on our entire approach. Marcus caught on immediately. You're thinking we should bring her in as a consultant? I'm thinking we should do more than that, James replied. But let's start with getting that formula corrected. Keisha felt as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. I don't understand what you're suggesting. James smiled warmly. What we're suggesting, Keisha, is that you might have just earned yourself a very different future than the one you were planning when you walked into work today. The conversation was interrupted by Keisha's manager approaching the table. Dave was a heavy-set man in his 50s who had been running Mel's Diner for over a decade. He looked concerned about one of his employees spending so much time with customers instead of working. Keisha, honey, I need you to check on table 6 and take care of the coffee station. Of course, Mr. Peterson. Keisha started to rise, but James placed a gentle hand on her arm. Excuse me, James said to the manager. I'm James Hartwell. Could I speak with you privately for just a moment? Dave's expression shifted to wariness. Wealthy customers sometimes complained about service, and he couldn't afford to lose business. Is there a problem with Keisha's service? Dave asked defensively. Quite the opposite, James assured him. Could we step aside for just a moment? Dave looked confused but followed James to a quiet corner near the front entrance. Keisha watched anxiously as the two men spoke in low voices. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see Dave's expression change from wariness to amazement to disbelief. Marcus used the opportunity to make several more phone calls, reorganizing meetings and explaining the delay to various stakeholders. Keisha could hear fragments of his conversations, mentions of critical error, major revision, and fortunate discovery. After a few minutes, James returned with Dave, whose face showed complete bewilderment. Keisha, Dave said slowly, Mr. Hartwell says you helped them with some kind of business problem? I just pointed out a mathematical error, Keisha said modestly. Dave looked between the well-dressed businessman and his part-time employee, clearly struggling to process the situation. He says you can take the rest of the day off, Dave continued, with pay. And he's asked me to be flexible with your schedule if you need time for other opportunities. Keisha felt a surge of gratitude toward James for handling the situation so diplomatically. She knew Dave was a good man who had given her flexible hours to accommodate her class schedule, but he was also practical about running his business. That's very generous, Mr. Hartwell, but I don't want to leave Dave short-staffed. We'll manage, Dave said, still looking dazed. Go ahead and take care of whatever this is about. As Keisha hung up her apron and gathered her things, she felt as if she were stepping into an entirely different world. Just hours ago, Her biggest concern had been finishing her quantum mechanics homework after her shift ended. Now, she was walking out of the diner with two billionaires who seemed to believe her future had fundamentally changed. "My car is outside," Marcus said as they left the diner. "I'd like to take you to my office, if you're willing. I want you to meet with my research team." Keisha hesitated. "I have class tonight." "What time?" James asked. 7 o'clock. Quantum mechanics with Professor Williams. Marcus checked his watch. It was just past 3 in the afternoon. "We'll have you there in plenty of time. In fact, I'd like to meet Professor Williams as well." As they walked toward Marcus's Mercedes, Keisha caught a glimpse of the executive floors of Chun Technologies occupied the top 3 levels of a gleaming downtown Chicago skyscraper. As the elevator climbed past the 37th floor, Keisha watched the city shrink beneath them through floor-to-ceiling windows. She had never been this high up in a building, and the view was both breathtaking and intimidating. Marcus stood beside her, his phone constantly buzzing with calls and messages. The news of the formula error was spreading quickly through his organization, and damage control was in full swing. James had left them at the building entrance, promising to return within an hour after handling his own urgent business calls. "Dr. Sarah Martinez, my head of research, is assembling the team now," Marcus explained as they reached the 40th floor. "I want you to walk them through exactly what you observed." The elevator doors opened to reveal a sophisticated reception area with modern art and carefully arranged seating. A young receptionist looked up as they entered, her professional smile faltering slightly when she saw Keisha's casual attire among the sea of business suits that typically populated these floors. "Mr. Chun, Dr. Martinez is waiting in conference room A with the quantum research team," the receptionist informed them. As they walked down a corridor lined with awards and patents, Keisha felt increasingly out of place. Every person they passed wore expensive clothing and carried themselves with the confidence that came from advanced degrees and high-paying positions. She was acutely aware of her simple jeans and Chicago Community College sweatshirt. Conference Room A was an impressive space with a massive oval table surrounded by ergonomic chairs. Large monitors lined the walls, currently displaying complex mathematical equations and quantum field diagrams. 6 people sat around the table, all looking expectant and slightly confused about why they had been called to an emergency meeting. Dr. Sarah Martinez stood as they entered. She was a woman in her early 40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her credentials were legendary in the quantum computing field: MIT doctorate, former researcher at CERN, author of groundbreaking papers on quantum entanglement applications. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight with stress, "I've had my team working on the formula verification for the past hour. We're finding some concerning anomalies." "Dr. Martinez, I'd like you to meet Keisha Thompson," Marcus said. "She's the one who identified the error." Dr. Martinez looked at Keisha with curiosity and perhaps a hint of skepticism. "Ms. Thompson, Marcus mentioned you have a background in quantum mechanics." "I'm taking a course at community college," Keisha replied honestly, feeling the weight of 6 pairs of eyes studying her intently. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Dr. Martinez glanced at Marcus with an expression that clearly asked whether he was serious about bringing a community college student to discuss their most critical research project. Dr. James Park, a thin man with thick glasses, was the first to speak. "With respect, Mr. Chun, we're dealing with extremely sophisticated theoretical framework here. The mathematics involved requires years of specialized training to fully understand." "I understand your skepticism," Marcus replied calmly. "But Ms. Thompson identified a critical error that our entire team missed. I think we should hear what she has to say." Dr. Martinez activated one of the wall monitors, displaying the quantum processing formula in question. "This is the equation set we've been developing for the past 3 years. Every calculation has been verified multiple times by different team members." Keisha studied the display, her mind automatically working through the mathematical relationships. The error she had spotted at the diner was still there, but now, seeing the complete formula set, she noticed additional problems. "The third coefficient isn't the only issue," Keisha said quietly. "Excuse me." Dr. Martinez stepped closer to the monitor. "The third coefficient should be negative, like I mentioned before. But looking at the complete set, there are other problems too." Keisha approached the display, pointing to specific sections. In the seventh equation, the eigenvalue calculation assumes a closed system, but the boundary conditions you've established suggest an open system with external quantum field interactions. Dr. Park frowned, following her reasoning on his tablet. The boundary conditions were designed to isolate the quantum processor from environmental interference. But that's not how quantum systems actually behave in real-world applications, Keisha continued, gaining confidence. Professor Williams always emphasizes that theoretical models have to account for practical constraints. You can't just assume perfect isolation. Dr. Martinez was now actively working through calculations on her own device. Show me what you mean about the eigenvalue problem. Keisha borrowed a marker and began writing equations on a whiteboard beside the main display. Her handwriting was neat and precise, the mathematical symbols flowing naturally as she demonstrated the relationships between the various formula components. If you modify the boundary conditions to account for realistic quantum field fluctuations, she explained while writing, you need to adjust not just the third coefficient, but also the integration constants in equations 7 through 11. The room fell silent except for the scratching of the marker on the whiteboard. The quantum research team watched with growing amazement as Keisha systematically identified and corrected multiple errors in their theoretical framework. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a specialist in quantum computing applications, was running Keisha's corrected equations through simulation software on her laptop. The modified calculations are showing much more stable behavior, she reported. Processing efficiency is actually higher than our original projections. How much higher? Marcus asked. About 15% improvement in quantum state coherence, and the system maintains stability through over 2,000 iterations instead of failing at 47. Dr. Martinez set down her tablet and looked at Keisha with genuine respect. Where did you learn to approach quantum field problems this way? Professor Williams teaches us to always consider real-world applications, Keisha replied. He says pure theoretical models are beautiful, but engineering solutions have to work in imperfect conditions. Professor Williams at Chicago Community College? Dr. Park asked. Do you know him? Know him. Robert Williams was my doctoral advisor at Northwestern 15 years ago. He's one of the most brilliant quantum theorists in the country. Dr. Park looked embarrassed. I had no idea he was teaching at community college. Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. Dr. Park, are you saying that MS Thompson's professor is Robert Williams? It has to be the same person. There aren't many professors who take that particular approach to boundary condition problems. Dr. Martinez was back at the whiteboard, working through additional implications of Keisha's corrections. If we implement these modifications, we'll need to completely restructure our manufacturing approach. The quantum processors will require different shielding configurations. But they'll actually work, Dr. Vasquez added. And work better than we originally hoped. Marcus felt a mixture of gratitude and professional embarrassment. His company had invested tens of millions of dollars and 3 years of research time, only to have critical errors identified by a community college student in a matter of minutes. Ms. Thompson, he said formally, I need to ask you a very important question. Keisha turned from the whiteboard, marker still in her hand. Would you be interested in working with our team on a more permanent basis? We need people who can think the way you think, who can see problems that others miss. Dr. Martinez nodded enthusiastically. Marcus is right. Your approach to these problems is exactly what we need. Fresh perspective, practical application focus, attention to details that experts sometimes overlook. Keisha felt overwhelmed. But I'm just a student. I don't have the credentials or experience. You have something more valuable than credentials, Dr. Park interrupted. You have insight. And you were trained by one of the best quantum theorists in the world. I'm still learning the basics, Keisha protested. We're all still learning, Dr. Martinez replied. The difference is that you're learning to ask the right questions. Marcus's phone buzzed with another urgent call, but he ignored it. This conversation was too important to interrupt. I know this is a lot to process, he said to Keisha. You don't have to make any decisions right now, but I want you to know that there's a place for you here if you want it. Before Keisha could respond, the conference room door opened and James Hartwell entered, looking slightly out of breath. Sorry I'm late. How did the consultation go? She found 4 additional errors, Dr. Martinez reported, and provided solutions for all of them. James raised his eyebrows. 4 additional errors? The modifications improve system performance by 15% while providing much greater stability, Dr. Vasquez added. James looked at Keisha with something approaching awe. In one afternoon, you've accomplished what our combined teams couldn't do in 3 years. It's not that impressive, Keisha said modestly. I just applied principles I learned in class. Don't minimize what you've done, James replied firmly. You've prevented a disaster and improved our technology beyond what we thought possible. Marcus checked his watch. It was approaching 6 o'clock, and he remembered Keisha's class commitment. We should get you to your quantum mechanics class, he said. But I have a proposal. Everyone in the room looked at him expectantly. I'd like to speak with Professor Williams. If he's willing, I'd like to offer him a consulting position with our research team. And I'd like to establish a scholarship program at Chicago Community College for students in advanced mathematics and physics. Keisha felt tears welling in her eyes. The generosity was overwhelming. That's very kind, Mr. Chun, but you don't need to. It's not kindness, Marcus interrupted. It's smart business. We almost made $100 million mistake because we isolated ourselves from fresh thinking. Professor Williams has obviously developed an effective teaching methodology, and his students clearly have valuable perspectives. James nodded enthusiastically. I'd like to participate in the scholarship program as well, and I think we should discuss creating an internship pipeline between the college and both our companies. Dr. Martinez was already making notes on her tablet. We could establish a formal research partnership. Bring in students to work on real-world applications of theoretical concepts. The conversation was moving so fast that Keisha could barely keep up. An hour ago, she had been worried about having enough money for textbooks next semester. Now, 2 billionaire CEOs were discussing scholarship programs and research partnerships. I really do need to get to class, she said finally. Of course, Marcus replied. My driver will take you to campus. Can you meet us after class? I'd like you to introduce us to Professor Williams. Keisha agreed, still feeling as if she were living in someone else's life. As they left the conference room, Dr. Martinez approached her privately. I meant what I said about having a place for you here, the researcher said quietly. I've been working in this field for 20 years, and I've rarely seen someone with your intuitive understanding of quantum systems. But I'm still learning, Keisha repeated. We all are. The question is whether you're learning in isolation or as part of a team that can help you reach your full potential. The elevator ride to the ground floor passed in contemplative silence. Marcus and James were both on their phones, handling the continued fallout from the formula revision. Keisha stared out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. When they reached the lobby, Marcus's driver was waiting with the Mercedes. As Keisha settled into the back seat, James leaned in through the open door. I want you to think about something, he said seriously. You have a gift, a rare ability to see patterns and relationships that others miss. The question you need to ask yourself is how you want to use that gift. As the car pulled away from the curb, Keisha reflected on the extraordinary events of the day. This morning, her biggest concern had been whether she could afford to buy the additional textbook Professor Williams had recommended. Tonight, she was being driven to class in a billionaire's Mercedes after potentially changing the trajectory of 2 major corporations. The Chicago Community College campus was a modest collection of buildings compared to the gleaming skyscraper they had just left. But as they approached the main building where her quantum mechanics class met, Keisha felt a sense of belonging that had been missing during her time on the executive floors of Chin Technologies. I'll wait for you here, the driver said as she stepped out of the car. Keisha made her way to classroom 204, arriving just as Professor Williams was setting up his presentation equipment. The classroom was small and practical, with basic desks and a simple whiteboard that had seen better days. About 20 students were scattered around the room, most of them looking tired after full days of work and other responsibilities. Professor Williams looked up as she entered. He was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and wild gray hair that suggested he spent more time thinking about mathematical theories than personal appearance. Keisha, he said warmly, I was afraid you might miss class. I know your work schedule can be demanding. I wouldn't miss it, Professor. Actually, I had an interesting experience today that relates to our coursework. Professor Williams raised an eyebrow. Oh, what kind of experience? Keisha briefly explained her encounter at the diner, leaving out the specific identities of the businessmen involved. She focused on the mathematical problem and her application of quantum field theory principles. Professor Williams listened with growing interest. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You identified errors in a quantum processing formula developed by professional researchers. I think so. They seemed to agree that the problems were real. Professor Williams smiled proudly. Keisha, do you understand the significance of what you've described? Not really, she admitted. You've demonstrated exactly what I try to teach in this class. That mathematical truth doesn't depend on credentials or status. An equation is either correct or incorrect, regardless of who wrote it. As the class began, Professor Williams used Keisha's experience as a teaching example, discussing the importance of careful verification and the dangers of assuming that expertise equals infallibility. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in science have come from people who approach problems without preconceived notions, he explained to the class. Fresh eyes can see what experienced eyes have learned to overlook. During the break, Keisha mentioned that some people wanted to meet with Professor Williams after class. What kind of people? He asked curiously. The businessmen from today? They want to discuss some kind of consulting opportunity. Professor Williams looked intrigued, but not particularly surprised. In my experience, practical applications of theoretical work tend to generate interest from the business community. When class ended, Keisha led Professor Williams outside to where Marcus's Mercedes was still waiting. Both Marcus and James had arrived during the class period and were standing near the car, engaged in conversation with several other well-dressed individuals who had apparently joined them. Professor Williams stopped short when he saw the group. Keisha, who exactly did you help today? Before she could answer, Marcus approached them with a warm smile. Professor Williams, I presume? I'm Marcus Chun, CEO of Chin Technologies. Professor Williams's eyes widened in recognition. Chin Technologies was one of the most innovative companies in quantum computing research. And I'm James Hartwell, CEO of Quantum Industries, James added, extending his hand. Professor Williams shook hands with both men, looking somewhat bewildered. I'm pleased to meet you both. I understand you had some interaction with one of my students. More than interaction, Marcus replied. Ms. Thompson may have saved both our companies from a catastrophic error. As they explained the events of the day, Professor Williams's expression shifted from confusion to amazement to pride. When they described Keisha's analysis of the quantum processing formula, he smiled broadly. That sounds exactly like the kind of practical application I try to encourage, he said. Too often, students learn theory without understanding how it connects to real-world problems. Which brings us to our proposal, James said. We'd like to discuss establishing a formal partnership between your program and our companies. Professor Williams looked at Keisha, then back at the two CEOs. What kind of partnership? Research collaboration, consulting opportunities, internship programs, and scholarship funding, Marcus outlined. We've realized that our companies have become too insular. We need fresh perspectives from people who approach problems differently. And, James added, we'd like to offer you a position as senior consulting advisor to our combined quantum research division. Professor Williams was quiet for a long moment, processing the unexpected opportunity. Finally, he spoke. Gentlemen, I'm honored by your offer, but I need you to understand something important. Both CEOs waited attentively. My primary commitment is to my students. These young people are working multiple jobs, supporting families, and pursuing education despite significant financial constraints. They're here because they have passion for learning, not because they had every advantage handed to them. We understand that, Marcus said. In fact, that's exactly why we want to work with your program. If I accept your consulting offer, Professor Williams continued, it will be with the condition that any partnership focuses primarily on creating opportunities for students like Keisha, people with talent and dedication who just need a chance to prove themselves. That's exactly what we have in mind, James assured him. The coffee shop near Chicago Community College had seen better days. Mismatched furniture and fluorescent lighting created an atmosphere that was functional rather than elegant, but Professor Williams had chosen it deliberately. He wanted the business executives to understand the environment where real learning took place, away from corporate boardrooms and expensive conference facilities. Marcus and James sat somewhat uncomfortably in plastic chairs around a small table, their expensive suits contrasting sharply with the student-friendly atmosphere. Several other executives had joined them, including Dr. Martinez and the heads of both companies' legal and human resources departments. Keisha sat beside Professor Williams, still processing the surreal nature of the situation. Around them, other community college students studied at nearby tables, unaware that a conversation taking place just feet away might change their academic opportunities forever. "Let me be direct about what we're proposing," Marcus began, pulling out a tablet with prepared notes. "We want to establish a comprehensive partnership that benefits everyone involved." Professor Williams sipped his coffee, regular drip, not the elaborate espresso drinks the executives had ordered, and waited for details. "First, consulting arrangements," James continued. "We'd like to retain Professor Williams as senior mathematical advisor for both our research divisions. The compensation would be substantial enough to allow reduced teaching loads if desired." "I don't want reduced teaching loads," Professor Williams replied firmly. "Teaching is what I do. If anything, I'd want to expand educational opportunities for my students." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "What if we structured it differently? Instead of reducing your teaching, what if we brought your teaching to our research facilities?" "Explain that," Professor Williams said, his interest clearly piqued. "Mobile classroom units. We bring groups of students to our labs for hands-on experience with quantum computing equipment that they could never access otherwise," Dr. Martinez outlined. "You continue teaching, but with resources most universities can't provide." Keisha felt excitement building as she listened to the possibilities being discussed. Access to professional-grade quantum computing equipment would transform the learning experience for students like herself. "What about the scholarship programs you mentioned?" she asked. Marcus nodded toward his human resources director, a sharp-looking woman named Patricia Vance. "We're proposing full-ride scholarships for community college students who want to continue their education in mathematics, physics, or engineering," Patricia explained. "But not just tuition. Living expenses, books, research stipends, everything needed to focus on learning without financial stress." "How many scholarships?" Professor Williams asked. "To start, 20 per year between both companies," James replied, "with expansion possibilities based on program success." Professor Williams was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "And the selection criteria?" "Academic performance, certainly," Patricia continued, "but also demonstrated problem-solving ability and practical application skills. We're not just looking for people who can memorize formulas. We want thinkers like Ms. Thompson." Keisha felt a mix of pride and pressure at being held up as an example. She was still learning herself and worried about living up to expectations. "There's something else," Marcus added. "We'd like to offer Ms. Thompson a position immediately, if she's interested." Professor Williams looked at Keisha with concern. "You don't want to encourage students to drop out of their programs." "Not drop out," Marcus clarified quickly. "Work-study arrangement. Part-time position with our research team while she continues her education. She could complete her degree while gaining professional experience." "What kind of position?" Keisha asked nervously. Dr. Martinez answered. "Research assistant initially, working directly with our quantum computing development team. Your insights this afternoon showed us that we need people who can bridge theoretical knowledge with practical applications." James pulled out his own tablet, showing financial projections. The salary would be more than sufficient to cover all educational expenses, with enough left over for a comfortable living. Keisha stared at the numbers on the screen. The proposed salary was more than her parents made in a year combined. It would not only solve her financial struggles, but completely transform her family's circumstances. "This feels overwhelming," she admitted honestly. Professor Williams placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Big decisions shouldn't be made quickly. Take time to think about what you really want. But while you're thinking," James added, "consider this. You have an opportunity to help shape the future of quantum computing technology. And, more importantly, you can help create pathways for other students who come from similar circumstances." The conversation was interrupted by Keisha's phone buzzing with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled slightly. What is it? Professor Williams asked. My little brother Marcus. He wants to know if I can help him with his algebra homework tonight. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on anyone at the table. A young woman who had just corrected quantum physics formulas was being asked to help with basic algebra. Tell me about your family, James requested gently. Keisha hesitated, unsure how much personal information to share with these powerful strangers. Go ahead, Professor Williams encouraged. These people need to understand who you are and where you come from. Keisha took a deep breath and began describing her background. Her mother worked 2 jobs, cleaning office buildings at night and stocking shelves at a grocery store during the day. Her father had been laid off from a manufacturing plant 6 months ago and was struggling to find new work. Her younger brother Marcus showed promise in mathematics, but attended an underfunded high school with limited advanced course offerings. The job at the diner lets me help with family expenses while paying for my own education, she explained. My goal was to eventually transfer to a 4-year university, get a degree in mathematics or physics, and find a stable job that could help my family achieve financial security. The executives listened quietly, and Keisha could see understanding growing in their expressions. Her situation wasn't unique. It reflected the reality for millions of students who had talent and ambition but lacked financial resources. How many students in your quantum mechanics class face similar challenges? Marcus asked Professor Williams. Most of them, Professor Williams replied. Community college attracts people who are working, supporting families, or coming back to education later in life. They're not traditional students with family support and college funds, but they bring real-world perspective that's often missing in traditional academic environments, Dr. Martinez observed. Exactly, Professor Williams agreed. Students like Keisha understand that mathematics has to work in practical applications, not just theoretical models. James was making notes on his tablet. What if we expanded the program beyond just scholarships? What if we created a direct pathway from community college to professional research positions? Like an apprenticeship model? Patricia Vance suggested. Something like that. Identify talented students early, provide financial support for their education, and give them hands-on experience with real research projects. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. We could establish research partnerships with community colleges nationwide. Create opportunities for students who might never otherwise have access to advanced scientific careers. Keisha listened to this discussion with growing amazement. The conversation had evolved from her individual situation to a potential transformation of educational opportunities for students across the country. Can I ask you something? She said during a brief pause in the planning discussion. Of course, James replied. Why are you doing all this? I pointed out an error in your formula, which was helpful, but these programs you're discussing would cost millions of dollars and require enormous effort to implement. Marcus and James exchanged glances before Marcus answered. Because we almost made a catastrophic mistake, he said honestly. Our companies employ hundreds of people with advanced degrees, sophisticated equipment, and unlimited budgets. But we missed critical errors that you caught in minutes. That tells us something important about our approach, James continued. We've become isolated in our expertise. We need fresh perspectives, people who ask different questions, and see problems from different angles. Dr. Martinez nodded in agreement. Scientific advancement often comes from unexpected sources. People who haven't been trained to think in conventional ways sometimes see solutions that experts miss. Professor Williams smiled proudly at Keisha. Which brings us back to educational philosophy. I've always believed that mathematics belongs to everyone, not just people with expensive degrees. And, Patricia Vance added from a business perspective, diversity of thought leads to better decision-making and more innovative solutions. Keisha's phone buzzed again with another message from her brother. This time it was a photo of his algebra homework with a question mark. I should probably help him, she said apologetically. Why don't we all go? Professor Williams suggested unexpectedly. The executives looked surprised by the suggestion. I'm serious, Professor Williams continued. If you want to understand the environment that produces students like Keisha, you should see where she comes from. Marcus and James looked at each other uncertainly. Corporate executives didn't typically make house calls to working-class neighborhoods. It's not necessary, Keisha said quickly, feeling embarrassed about the suggestion. Yes, it is, James said firmly. Professor Williams is right. If we're going to create meaningful programs, we need to understand the communities we're trying to serve. 20 minutes later, a small convoy of expensive cars followed Keisha's directions to her family's apartment building in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. The building was well-maintained, but clearly aging, surrounded by similar structures housing working families trying to make ends meet. Keisha's apartment was on the third floor, a two-bedroom unit where 4 people had learned to share space efficiently. As they climbed the stairs, she felt nervous about introducing her family to such important visitors. "Mom's probably home from her morning shift," she explained. "She works nights at an office complex and mornings at the grocery store." Maria Thompson opened the door wearing a tired smile that brightened immediately when she saw her daughter. She was a small woman in her mid-40s whose hands showed the effects of physical labor, but whose eyes reflected intelligence and determination. "Mija, you're home early," she said in accented English. Then, noticed the group of well-dressed people behind Keisha. "Oh, we have company. Mom, these are some people I met today. They wanted to meet our family." Maria stepped back, inviting everyone into the small living room that served multiple functions: study space, entertainment center, and dining area when the kitchen table wasn't sufficient. Marcus Thompson Jr., Keisha's 15-year-old brother, looked up from his algebra homework spread across the coffee table. He bore a strong resemblance to his sister, but was taller and more outgoing. "Keisha, perfect timing. I'm stuck on problem 17. Before Keisha could respond, her father emerged from the kitchen. Roberto Thompson was a stocky man with calloused hands and worried eyes, still adjusting to unexpected unemployment after 20 years in manufacturing. "Roberto, this is Mr. Chun and Mr. Hartwell." Keisha began introductions. "They're business executives who wanted to meet Professor Williams and our family." Roberto shook hands politely, but looked confused about why wealthy businessmen would be visiting his home. Maria quickly offered coffee and apologizes for the modest accommodations. Marcus and James assured her that no apology was necessary and accepted the offered coffee with genuine appreciation. "Your daughter helped us solve a very important problem today," James explained to Keisha's parents. As the adults settled into conversation, Keisha sat beside her brother to help with his algebra homework. Marcus Chun watched this interaction with interest, noting how naturally she adapted her explanation to her brother's learning style. "See, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be," she told Marcus Jr. "The equation is asking you to find the value of x, right? So just work backwards from what you know." She guided him through the problem step by step, using examples from everyday life to illustrate abstract concepts. Watching her teach, Marcus Chun realized that her ability to explain complex ideas simply was exactly what his research teams needed. Meanwhile, James was talking with Roberto about his work experience and the challenges of finding new employment in a changing economy. 20 years in manufacturing, Roberto said. "Good, steady work until the plant closed. Now everything requires computer skills I don't have." "What kind of manufacturing?" James asked with genuine interest. "Precision components for aerospace applications. Very detailed work, tight tolerances. I was proud of the quality we maintained." James nodded thoughtfully. Manufacturing precision and attention to detail were exactly the qualities needed in quantum computing component production. Professor Williams was discussing educational philosophy with Maria, who despite working multiple jobs had strong opinions about her children's schooling. "Education is the only way to improve our situation," she said firmly. "I work these jobs so my children can focus on learning and have opportunities one never had." How does Keisha manage to excel academically while working and helping with family responsibilities? Dr. Martinez asked. Maria smiled proudly. She has always been organized, disciplined. Even as a little girl, she would finish her homework before playing. And she helps Marcus Jr. with his studies every night. As the evening progressed, the business executives gained deep insight into the Thompson family's dynamics. They saw how Keisha's academic success was supported by strong family values and clear priorities despite financial constraints. More importantly, they understood that her mathematical abilities were enhanced rather than hindered by her practical experience. Solving real-world problems, from budgeting household expenses to helping her brother understand abstract concepts, had strengthened her ability to connect theoretical knowledge with practical applications. When Marcus Jr. successfully completed his algebra assignment with Keisha's help, he grinned with satisfaction. "Thanks, sis. You always make it make sense." That, Professor Williams said quietly to the executives, is exactly the kind of teaching ability that makes great researchers. As the visit concluded, James addressed the entire family. "We've offered Keisha an opportunity to work with our research teams while continuing her education. But we want you to know that this isn't just about helping one person. We're hoping to create programs that provide similar opportunities for many students facing similar challenges." Roberto and Maria looked at each other with expressions mixing hope and caution. Opportunities that seemed too good to be true often were. "What exactly are you offering our daughter?" Roberto asked directly. Marcus outlined the work-study position, the salary, and the educational support. He was honest about the responsibilities and expectations. "But, most importantly," he added, "we're offering her a chance to use her abilities to help create opportunities for others. Students like your son Marcus Jr. could benefit from programs we develop." Maria turned to her daughter. "What do you want, Mija?" Keisha looked around the room, at her family who had sacrificed so much to support her education, at Professor Williams who had taught her to trust her own knowledge, and at the executives who were offering her opportunities she had never imagined possible. "I want to help," she said simply. "I want to help fix problems that need fixing, and I want to help create chances for other people like us." Then, Maria said with a smile, "I think you already know your answer." As the group prepared to leave, James pulled Roberto aside for a private conversation. "Mr. Thompson, we're going to need experienced precision manufacturing supervisors when we scale up production of our quantum computing components. Would you be interested in discussing employment opportunities?" Roberto's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. "You would consider hiring someone like me?" "Someone like you," James replied. "Someone with 20 years of experience maintaining quality standards in precision manufacturing? We'd be honored to have you on our team." The evening that had begun with algebra homework had evolved in 3 months had passed since that extraordinary day at Mel's Diner, and the transformed landscape of Keisha's life still felt surreal at times. She sat in her new office at Chin Technologies, a modest but comfortable space with a window overlooking downtown Chicago, reviewing quantum processor design specifications that would have seemed impossibly complex just a few months ago. The work-study arrangement had exceeded everyone's expectations. Keisha maintained her full course load at Chicago Community College while spending 25 hours per week with the quantum research team. The combination of theoretical learning and practical application had accelerated her understanding in ways that surprised even Professor Williams. Her desk was covered with printouts of mathematical calculations, tablet computers displaying quantum field simulations, and a framed photo of her family taken the day her father started his new job as precision manufacturing supervisor at Quantum Industries. The image reminded her daily that individual opportunities could create ripple effects far beyond what anyone initially imagined. A soft knock on her office door interrupted her concentration. Dr. Martinez entered with her usual warm smile, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need a caffeine break," she said, settling into the chair across from Keisha's desk. "Thanks. I was just reviewing the prototype specifications for the new quantum processors." Dr. Martinez glanced at the papers spread across the desk. Finding any issues with the design parameters? It had become routine for team members to seek Keisha's input on technical problems. Her unique ability to identify potential errors and suggest practical improvements had made her an invaluable member of the research division. "Actually, yes," Keisha replied, pointing to specific sections of the specifications. "The cooling system calculations assume perfect thermal isolation, but the housing materials you've specified will create thermal bridges that could destabilize quantum coherence." Dr. Martinez leaned forward to examine the calculations. Over the past 3 months, she had learned to take Keisha's observations very seriously. "What do you recommend? Different materials for the housing interface, or modified cooling algorithms that compensate for realistic thermal transfer rates?" "I'll have the engineering team run simulations on both approaches," Dr. Martinez said, making notes on her tablet. "Your eye for practical constraints continues to save us time and money." As Dr. Martinez left to discuss the findings with the engineering department, Keisha reflected on how naturally she had adapted to professional research work. The environment that had initially seemed intimidating now felt like a place where her abilities were valued, and her contributions made a real difference. Her phone buzzed with a text from Professor Williams. Board meeting this afternoon. Ready to present the scholarship program expansion. Keisha smiled as she typed back, ready as I'll ever be. The scholarship program that had grown from their initial conversation had exceeded all expectations. What began as a proposal for 20 annual scholarships had evolved into a comprehensive initiative serving over 200 students across 15 community colleges in the Chicago area. More importantly, the program had caught the attention of other technology companies, leading to a consortium of businesses supporting similar educational partnerships nationwide. Keisha found herself increasingly involved in program development and evaluation, work that felt as meaningful as her research responsibilities. At 1 o'clock, she made her way to the main conference room for the quarterly board meeting. The space was filled with Chun Technologies executives, quantum industries leadership, and representatives from the other companies that had joined the educational consortium. Marcus Chin stood at the front of the room, presenting financial results that showed remarkable success across all program metrics. Student retention rates in our partner programs exceed 95%, he reported. Job placement rates for graduates are nearly perfect, and the quality of candidates we're seeing for entry-level positions has improved dramatically. James Hartwell added his own perspective from Quantum Industries. Our partnership with community college programs has identified talent that traditional recruitment methods completely missed. We're getting employees who combine theoretical knowledge with practical problem-solving skills. When it came time for Keisha to present the expansion proposal, she felt confident despite the high-stakes environment. Public speaking had never been her strength, but discussing programs that could help students like herself felt natural and important. The data shows that our most successful students come from programs that combine theoretical coursework with hands-on research experience, she began, displaying charts and statistics on the room's large monitors. We recommend expanding the mobile laboratory program to include advanced equipment that gives community college students access to professional-grade research tools. Dr. Patricia Vance, now Director of Educational Partnerships for both companies, raised her hand. What kind of equipment are we talking about? Quantum computing processors, advanced mathematical modeling software, precision measurement instruments. Equipment that most universities can't afford, but that gives students real experience with the tools they'll use in professional careers. The presentation continued for 45 minutes, covering program expansion to additional states, increased scholarship funding, and the development of specialized tracks for students interested in specific technology sectors. When Keisha finished, the board members asked detailed questions about implementation costs, expected outcomes, and measurement criteria. She answered confidently, drawing on 3 months of program evaluation data and her understanding of student needs. One more question, said David Kim, a board member from Chun Technologies. Ms. Thompson, how has this experience changed your own educational and career goals? Keisha paused thoughtfully before responding. 3 months ago, I was focused primarily on my own education and helping my family achieve financial stability. That's still important, but now I understand that individual success can create opportunities for entire communities. Can you elaborate on that? The scholarship program has helped over 200 students so far. Many of them are supporting families, working multiple jobs, facing the same challenges I faced. When they succeed, their families benefit, their communities benefit, and the companies that hire them benefit. She gestured to the data displayed on the monitors. But, more importantly, they become examples for younger students who might not otherwise believe that advanced education is possible for people like them. James nodded approvingly. So you see this as more than just an educational program? I see it as changing what's possible. My little brother Marcus Jr. is taking advanced mathematics courses now because he sees what education has done for our family. His friends are paying more attention in school because they know opportunities exist that didn't exist before. The board voted unanimously to approve the expansion proposal, allocating an additional $50 million over the next 3 years to support educational partnerships and student scholarships. After the meeting, Marcus Chin approached Keisha privately. "I have something I'd like to discuss with you," he said. "Could you join me in my office?" Marcus's executive office occupied a corner of the building's top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows providing panoramic views of the city. Keisha had been there several times over the past 3 months, but the impressive space still made her aware of how dramatically her life had changed. "How are you feeling about your progress here?" Marcus asked as they settled into comfortable chairs near the windows. "Grateful, challenged, excited," Keisha replied honestly. "I'm learning more than I ever thought possible." "And your long-term goals?" "I'm still figuring that out. 6 months ago, my goal was just to complete my education and find stable employment. Now I'm thinking about graduate school, research opportunities, maybe even starting my own programs someday." Marcus smiled. "Which brings me to what I wanted to discuss. We've been accepted into the National Science Foundation's Advanced Research Consortium." Keisha knew about the consortium, a prestigious group of companies and universities collaborating on cutting-edge quantum computing research with substantial federal funding. "That's wonderful news." The consortium requires participating companies to demonstrate commitment to educational outreach and diversity initiatives. "Our community college partnership programs have made us an attractive candidate. I'm glad our work contributed to that success." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Keisha, the consortium has offered us funding to establish a formal research institute focused on practical applications of quantum computing theory. They want the institute to be closely connected to educational programs that identify and develop talent from non-traditional sources." "That sounds like an amazing opportunity." "It is. And they've specifically requested that you be involved in designing and directing the educational components." Keisha felt her heart racing. What exactly would that involve? Developing curriculum, overseeing student research projects, managing relationships with community college partners, and conducting your own research on educational methodologies. "But I'm still a student myself. I don't have the credentials for that kind of responsibility." "You have something more valuable than traditional credentials," Marcus replied. "You have first-hand understanding of the challenges facing the students we want to serve, and you've demonstrated an ability to bridge theoretical knowledge with practical applications." He handed her a folder containing the formal proposal. "The position would include full funding for you to complete your bachelor's and master's degrees while working on the institute. You'd essentially be designing your own graduate program in applied mathematics education." Keisha opened the folder and scanned the documents. The scope of the proposed institute was breathtaking: research facilities, educational programs, industry partnerships, and funding for hundreds of students annually. "This is incredible, but it's also enormous. What if I'm not ready for this level of responsibility?" 6 months ago, you weren't ready to question quantum physicists in a conference room, Marcus pointed out. "But you did it anyway because you saw something that needed to be addressed." "That was different. I was just pointing out a mathematical error." "No, you were demonstrating the courage to speak truth regardless of social dynamics. That's exactly the quality needed to lead transformational programs." Keisha studied the proposal documents more carefully, noting the emphasis on practical problem-solving, community engagement, and creating pathways for underrepresented students. "Could I discuss this with Professor Williams before making a decision?" "Of course. In fact, we'd like him to be involved in the institute as well. The position we're offering would give him resources to develop and implement educational approaches that could be replicated nationwide." The conversation was interrupted by Keisha's phone ringing. She glanced at the caller ID and saw her mother's name. "Sorry, it's my mom. She never calls during work hours unless something's wrong." "Take the call," Marcus said immediately. "Mija, I'm sorry to bother you at work." Maria's voice carried excitement rather than worry. "I just got news I had to share." "What is it, Mom?" "Marcus Jr. has been accepted to the Summer Mathematics Intensive Program at Northwestern University. Full scholarship, including housing and meals." Keisha felt tears welling in her eyes. The program was extremely competitive and provided advanced high school students with college-level mathematics courses taught by university professors. "That's wonderful. How did he manage that?" His guidance counselor recommended him based on his improved grades, and his essay about how his sister's success inspired him to pursue advanced mathematics. After congratulating her mother and promising to celebrate with the family that evening, Keisha ended the call and looked at Marcus. My brother just earned a scholarship to a prestigious mathematics program. That's fantastic news. But the thing is, 6 months ago, he was just getting by in algebra. The change in his academic performance started when he saw what was possible for our family. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Individual success, creating opportunities for others. Exactly. And now you're offering me a chance to create those same kinds of opportunities for thousands of students. Is that a yes? Keisha looked out the window at the city below, thinking about all the young people who were working in diners and grocery stores while pursuing their education, facing the same challenges she had faced just months ago. It's a yes, she said firmly. But I have conditions. What conditions? First, the Institute has to maintain strong connections to community colleges and working-class communities. We can't become isolated in academic theory. Agreed. Second, students in our programs have to be involved in real research with practical applications, not just theoretical exercises. Of course. And third, we measure success not just by test scores and graduation rates, but by the impact our students have on their families and communities. Marcus extended his hand with a genuine smile. Welcome to the Thompson Institute for Applied Mathematics Education. The Thompson Institute. The consortium suggested naming it after the person who inspired the program. As they shook hands, Keisha felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders once again. But this time, it felt less like a burden and more like an opportunity to honor all the people who had supported her journey and to create possibilities for students who were just beginning theirs. That evening, as she helped Marcus Jr. with his advanced mathematics homework in preparation for his summer program, Keisha reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. 2 years after the Thompson Institute for Applied Mathematics Education opened its doors, Keisha stood before an audience of 500 students, educators, and business leaders at the National Conference on Educational Innovation. The young woman who had once served coffee while worrying about textbook costs now held a master's degree and was completing her doctoral dissertation on practical mathematics education. The conference was being held in a gleaming convention center in San Francisco, but Keisha had insisted on opening her presentation with a familiar image, a photograph of Mel's Diner in Chicago, where everything had begun. 2.5 years ago, I was working as a waitress at this diner, she began, her voice clear and confident as it carried across the auditorium. I was studying quantum mechanics at community college, serving coffee to pay for my education, and helping my little brother with algebra homework. The audience listened intently as she described that transformative afternoon when she noticed an error in a formula that would have cost 2 companies over $100 million. But this isn't really a story about mathematics, or business, or even educational opportunity, she continued. It's a story about the importance of speaking up when you see something that isn't right, regardless of your credentials or social status. Behind her, a large screen displayed data from the Thompson Institute's first 2 years of operation. The numbers were impressive. Over 800 students served, a 97% graduation rate, and job placement rates that exceeded national averages by significant margins. More importantly, Keisha said, gesturing to additional charts, our graduates are changing their families and communities. 60% report that their success has inspired family members to pursue additional education. 40% are now mentoring younger students in their home communities. In the front row, Professor Williams sat with Marcus and James, all 3 men wearing expressions of pride as they watched their former waitress and student address a national audience about transformational education policy. Dr. Martinez, now co-director of the Thompson Institute, had traveled from Chicago to attend Keisha's presentation. The research partnership between the Institute and Chun Technologies Ha Keisha, her brother said as they finished his calculus problems. Do you think other kids like us will have the same opportunities we've had? I'm going to do everything I can to make sure they do, she replied. Good, he said with the confidence of a 15-year-old who believed his sister could accomplish anything. Because everyone deserves a chance to learn what they're capable of. The young woman who had once been afraid to speak up in a diner was now preparing to design educational programs that could transform lives across the country. But she would never forget that it all began with the simple courage to say, I think there might be an error in that formula. To something much larger, a recognition that talent and dedication existed in unexpected places, and that creating opportunities for individuals could benefit entire communities. As Keisha walked the visitors to their cars, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Tomorrow, she would step into a completely different world, one where her decisions could affect not just her own future, but the futures of students and families she might never meet. But tonight, she had helped her little brother understand algebra, and her parents had received hope for their own professional futures. Sometimes the most important changes began with the simplest actions, like speaking up when something didn't look right, or taking time to explain a mathematical concept until it made sense. The young woman who had been afraid to question a formula in a diner was ready to help change the world, one problem at a time. Professor Williams smiled. In that case, I think we have a lot to discuss. As the group began walking toward a nearby coffee shop to continue their conversation, Keisha found herself reflecting on the day's incredible journey. 12 hours ago, she had been serving coffee and worrying about tuition payments. Now, she was part of discussions that could reshape her entire future. But, perhaps most importantly, she realized that her voice, her willingness to speak up when she saw something wrong, had set all of these changes in motion. The young woman who had been afraid to question successful businessmen had discovered that knowledge and integrity were more powerful than social status or wealth. The conversation ahead would determine the specific details of her future, but Keisha already understood the most important lesson of the day. Sometimes the most valuable perspective comes from the most unexpected source. Herself in the car's tinted windows. She looked exactly like what she was, a young woman in simple clothes, carrying a backpack full of textbooks, still smelling faintly of coffee from her shift at the diner. But something in her expression had changed. There was a new confidence there, a recognition that her knowledge and abilities had value beyond anything she had previously imagined. Marcus held the car door open for her, a gesture that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. As she settled into the leather seats, Keisha realized that whatever happened next, her life had already been transformed. The young woman who had been afraid to speak up about a mathematical error had found her voice. And that voice, it seemed, was going to change everything.